You know, when we think about conquest, we usually picture empires and armies. But what about a corporation? That's exactly what this story is about. We're diving into how a British trading firm, the East India Company, started its shocking transformation into the rulers of a subcontinent, and it all began with one single pivotal event, the Battle of Plassey.
So that's the big question here, right? How on earth does a company, a group of merchants obsessed with profit, manage to take over an entire territory? We're going to unpack how the East India Company seized political control of Bengal, which was this incredibly vast and wealthy region. It's a wild story of ambition, betrayal, and a power shift that would literally change the course of history.
Okay, let's set the scene. We're in the mid-18th century. The mighty Mughal Empire is starting to crumble, and local rulers are stepping up to claim their independence. And right in the heart of the action, in the rich province of Bengal, two powerful forces are on an absolute collision course: the brand new Nawab and the ever more ambitious British East India Company.
So after his predecessor died, a young guy named Siraj-ud-Daulah takes the throne. Now, he was a sharp, capable ruler. And let me tell you, he was not about to be some puppet for a foreign trading company. He saw their influence growing and was dead set on putting a stop to what he called the nuisance the company was creating.
So, what was all the fuss about? Well, a lot of the friction boiled down to this one little document, the Dastak. Think of it as a trade permit, a golden ticket from the Mughal emperor that let the company trade without paying any local taxes. In theory, that sounds simple enough, right? But in practice, well, the way it was being abused was costing the Nawab a fortune and totally undermining his rule.
You can imagine the Nawab was getting pretty fed up. He had this whole list of grievances. For starters, company officials were using these official Dastaks for their own private businesses on the side, basically cheating his treasury out of massive amounts of cash. Then, the company started building military forts in Calcutta without even asking for permission. And to top it all off, they were just flat out ignoring the Nawab's direct orders. These traders were starting to act a little too much like rulers.
Yeah, you can see this was a powder keg waiting to explode. Siraj-ud-Daulah knew he had to do something decisive, and that led straight to a military showdown and to one of the most controversial incidents in all of Indian history.
So, finally, the Nawab had enough. He marches on the company's holdings with 30,000 soldiers. First, he takes their factory at Qasam Bazar, and then he goes for the main prize, Calcutta, the heart of British power in Bengal. He even renamed the city Ali Naga. The British merchants had to run for their lives and hide out on an island. From the Nawab's point of view, he had put his foot down and shown them who was boss.
Okay, now this is where things get really fascinating. A story emerged from the capture of Calcutta that shaped everything. One of the survivors, a guy named John Holwell, wrote this absolutely sensational account. He claimed 146 British prisoners were shoved into a tiny dungeon and that 123 of them suffocated overnight. For years, this story of the Black Hole of Calcutta was used as propaganda to paint the Nawab as a monster. But modern historians have looked at this, and the picture is completely different. The numbers were way off, the story was massively exaggerated, and it's pretty much accepted now that the Nawab himself had nothing to do with it. It was, for all intents and purposes, a powerful piece of fake news.
Well, you can bet the news of Calcutta's fall hit the British settlement in Madras like a bombshell. The company's response was fast, and it was powerful. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about pride, power, and getting even.
And things moved at lightning speed from here. Just look at this timeline. In June, the Nawab takes Calcutta. By the end of that same year, British reinforcements, led by the incredibly ambitious Robert Clive, show up. By early 1757, Clive has already retaken the city, and just a month later, the Nawab is forced to sign a treaty. It's a whirlwind.
And this treaty, wow. This thing just perfectly captures the massive power shift. Look at these terms. The company gets all its old privileges back. That whole issue of misusing the Dastak, it's now officially allowed. They get permission to build up their forts in Calcutta, the very thing that started this whole mess. And get this, they can even mint their own money. This isn't a trade deal. This is the Nawab signing away his own authority.
And Robert Clive wasn't shy about it. He basically wrote home to his bosses, saying this treaty was, and I quote, both honorable and advantageous to the company. He knew they had won. Big time. They hadn't just recovered their losses. They'd come out of it with more power than ever before.
So, you've got to be asking yourself, right? The Nawab had a huge army. Why on earth would he agree to such a humiliating treaty? Was he really that scared of Clive's little force?
Well, the answer isn't about Clive's army. It's about what was happening offstage. See, Siraj-ud-Daulah had a much bigger problem on his mind. The Afghan ruler, a guy named Ahmad Shah Abdali, had just ransacked Delhi and was rumored to be heading straight for Bengal. So the Nawab made a calculated risk. He saw the Afghans as the bigger threat, so he signed the treaty to get the British off his back while he dealt with them. It was a political gamble that would turn out to be a fatal mistake.
But of course, a piece of paper wasn't going to stop what was coming. The Treaty of Ali Narga didn't bring peace because Clive and the company didn't want peace. They wanted it all, and they were about to get it, not through some great military victory, but through a dirty conspiracy that led to the infamous Battle of Plassey.
Take a look at this. The Battle of Plassey, it was basically a done deal before the first shot was even fired. Clive wasn't planning on a fair fight. He was busy making secret deals with the Nawab's own inner circle, especially with his top general, Mir Jafar. Clive promised to make Mir Jafar the new Nawab if he would just betray his master on the battlefield. And that's exactly what happened. When the armies met, a huge chunk of the Nawab's forces, led by Mir Jafar, just stood there. They refused to fight.
So the outcome was inevitable. Siraj-ud-Daulah was defeated, hunted down, and killed. And just as promised, the British put their man, the traitor Mir Jafar, on the throne of Bengal. This diagram shows their strategy perfectly. They checkmated the real ruler and replaced him with a puppet who owed them everything. The game had completely and permanently changed.
And that's the thing about Plassey. It wasn't just another battle. It was the moment everything changed. It marks the second the East India Company stopped being just a trading company and started being a territorial power. They were becoming a state.
And then, just a few years later, in 1765, the company gets the keys to the kingdom. The Mughal emperor, who was pretty weak by this point, granted them the Diwani of Bengal. This was the legal right to collect all the taxes from the entire province. Think about that. A private, foreign corporation now controlled the entire treasury of India's richest region. This is how they pulled off what's now called the drain of wealth. And honestly, it's a genius, if devastating, economic model. Before Plassey, the company had to bring treasure, gold and silver, from Britain to buy Indian goods. But now, they didn't need to. They just collected taxes from Bengalis, used that same money to buy goods from Bengalis, and then shipped those goods back to England for pure profit. British investment in India just stopped. It became a one-way street for wealth, flowing out of India and into Britain.
And while India was being drained, the company officials were getting unbelievably rich. After Plassey, the puppet Nawabs were forced to give them enormous personal gifts of cash and land. These guys would return to England as millionaires, and they even got a nickname, Nobs. Robert Clive himself, who started out as just a clerk, was accused of taking home over £400,000, an absolutely astronomical fortune back then.
Which brings us right back to that big final question. The story of Plassey is more than just history. It's a wild case study. It forces us to ask, what happens when an entity built only to make a profit, a corporation, also gets the power of a state, the power to tax, to make war, to rule? It's a question that was at the heart of this story in 1757, and you know what? It's a question that is still worth thinking about today.